Tonight, the National Disability Insurance Scheme to be overhauled in a bid to save billions of dollars. Yulma, good evening. I'm James Glenday, coming to you from Ngunnawal country, and we acknowledge others with connection to the lands of the ACT. This is ABC News. Also tonight, the Australian Defence Force Academy here in Canberra to cut ties with academics linked to China. An Australian first, Canberra's publicly funded residential eating disorder treatment centre ready to welcome patients. And Barack and Michelle Obama take centre stage at the Democratic National Convention. The National Disability Insurance Scheme is set for a major overhaul after the federal government secured support from the states and territories. The changes are aimed at reducing the rising costs of the $35 billion scheme, but the disability community is demanding a rethink.
After months of hard-fought negotiations with the states and territories, finally a breakthrough.
These are the first and most significant co-governance changes since the inception of the scheme a decade ago.
Labor's proposed changes are designed to rein in the ballooning cost of the NDIS.
It's growing at an unsustainable rate.
Costs projected to grow by 14% a year would be reduced to 8% through a system based on need rather than diagnosis. Greater government powers to seize any account suspected of fraud, and a new definition of what constitutes an NDIS support that's still to be negotiated with the states and territories.
We already provide significant additional support. We want to make sure that the federal government continues to recognise that as we move forward with the future changes to the NDIS.
To get the states on board, they've been offered faster decision-making on new NDIS rules and a move from unanimous to majority support from premiers and chief ministers for rule changes with significant impacts on people with disability. In terms of the budget, the stakes for the government are high, but not as high as they are for the community. For many, the NDIS is what gives them safety and independence, and major disability representative organisations are urging senators to vote against this legislation tomorrow.
Minister Shorten has been talking about making an agreement with the states and territories, which is great, but we were not there and we're not at the table.
We're not scared of change, but we are scared of this bill. It puts our lives and our freedom and our rights in danger.
The reality is that what we are doing is securing the future of the scheme, and that is what matters.
The legislation is expected to pass the Parliament with coalition support. Claudia Long, ABC News, Canberra.
Military leaders are being accused of acting too slowly on warnings to cut academic ties between China and the Australian Defence Force Academy here in Canberra. The ABC has revealed that the University of New South Wales, Canberra, which teaches courses for trainee officers at ADFA, has recently moved to limit research collaboration with Chinese universities. UNSW Canberra says any cooperation with high-risk institutions is subject to rigorous assessment as required by the federal government.
This has been a topic that has definitely been raised with defence leadership, particularly with foreign PhD students. At the end of the day, this is the remit of DFAT to look at who comes to this country and gives them visas to study in these very important educational programs.
Politicians could soon be suspended from Parliament, kicked off committees and even fined up to 5% of their salary if they're found to have engaged in misconduct. A new independent commission is set to be established nearly 4 years after a damning report into the toxic culture of federal Parliament was handed down.
Modernising old institutions takes time and will.
This legislation today is designed to move our Parliament forward one more step.
A step towards a workplace that actually sets the standard for others.
Every other workplace in the country has these standards of behaviour, and Parliament should too.
For the first time in the history of Parliament, codes of conduct for politicians and staffers have been written and endorsed. Now they'll be enforced. An independent Parliamentary Standards Commission is set to be established to investigate serious misconduct and sanction the culprits, including MPs and senators themselves.
The sanctions we're looking at are suspension, removal from a parliamentary committee or a fine. They are, plus, I guess, the the transparency that comes with this process.
While investigations will be kept secret, it'll be up to Parliament's 13-person Privileges Committee and ultimately the Parliament to determine which penalty should apply.
For years, politicians have behaved badly and got away with it, but that changes today.
It's the final recommendation of Kate Jenkins' landmark 2021 report, which lifted the lid on bad behaviour at Parliament House. A report triggered by the alleged rape of former staffer Brittany Higgins inside a ministerial office.
A set standard report found that bullying, harassment, other complaints were common in this workplace, and we're trying to change that.
Cultural change is happening here, albeit slowly. Parliament's adopted more family-friendly sitting hours and a new workplace support service has been set up, bringing an HR service to a building that lacked one. But in an atypical workplace where conflict is embedded, some reckon there's still room to lift the tone of debate.
The shouting, the mocking, the name-calling.
I have never stood in a boardroom and been yelled at.
Jane Norman, ABC News, Canberra.
The journalist who broke the story of Brittany Higgins' rape allegation has denied she was part of a conspiracy to bring down Liberal Senator Linda Reynolds. Samantha Maiden was giving evidence in the defamation case brought by Senator Reynolds against her former staffer Ms Higgins over several social media posts. Ms Maiden said Ms Higgins had never expressed to her a desire to bring down Senator Reynolds. The reporter also denied being a conduit between Ms Higgins and Labor senators, quizzing Senator Reynolds in Parliament. Ms Maiden said Senator Reynolds had told her she did not know if Ms Higgins had been raped, as she was not in the room at the time. In an audio recording of Ms Maiden's initial interview with Ms Higgins, the former political staffer says Senator Reynolds avoided her and hated her after the rape allegations became public in 2021. Australia's Domestic Violence Commissioner says more resources are urgently needed amid a national crisis of men's violence against women. Michaela Cronin today delivered her first progress report on the national plan to end gendered violence. She says there's a critical need to talk more with men about their violent behaviour and put greater focus on sexual violence. The Commissioner also reiterated calls for more frontline services funding.
Our service systems are overwhelmed, stretched beyond capacity. They are struggling to hold on to staff, and they are really at wit's end.
Now, with the ACT election campaign on the horizon, the two major parties are exchanging barbs over the education system in Canberra. The Barr government has agreed to implement improvements that were recommended by an independent review released in May. But the Canberra Liberals are now trying to convince families and teachers that they would provide a better alternative.
Despite reassurances from teachers, by year 2, Emily Lewis's son was still struggling with reading.
I think it became clear that the school didn't have the systems or the resources in place to try and bridge that gap along with us. So that's when we sought out an external tutor.
Emily is frustrated she had to seek support outside the public system.
There's a lot of private tutoring places in Canberra that are extremely expensive, like thousands of dollars per term, and it's just impossible for many families to be able to afford external tutoring.
In May, the ACT government agreed to implement recommendations of an expert panel on literacy and numeracy over 4 years, with $25 million in June's budget to increase teaching consistency, conduct phonics testing in Year 1 and provide multi-tiered support along with extra resources. The opposition doesn't think it's enough.
The Canberra Liberals have costed our policy to fully fund and fully implement the evidence-based approaches to improving literacy and numeracy, and that's at $98 million.
The Liberals are also promising more funding to improve classrooms and annual $200 vouchers for teachers.
We have heard from many teachers that a lot of the times they are putting their hand into their own pocket to purchase school supplies.
The Education Union has given the policy top marks.
The education plan announced by Elizabeth Lee today shows that she has listened to Canberra's public school teachers, and we certainly welcome that, and we welcome the constructive dialogue that she's engaged in.
But the Chief Minister argues the opposition is simply copying his government's homework.
We have already budgeted hundreds of millions of dollars, more than $600 million for work across our public education system. So an announcement today from the Liberals of only an extra $25 million, I don't think will achieve what they are stating it will.
Party's plans to be tested at the polls. Harry Frost, ABC News, Canberra.
Meanwhile, the ACT Greens have announced they'll seek to ban the installation of new gas appliances in Canberra within 3 years. In its climate policy ahead of the ACT election, the party also wants to cover the cost of 5,000 low-income households to transition from gas to electric appliances. The Greens have called for the government to bring forward its emissions reduction targets by 5 years to net zero by 2040. They say change in the type of appliances people use is inevitable.
We don't want people putting technology in that'll soon become obsolete. Now this is about new installations, it's about stopping the problem getting worse. People who are, as your device breaks down, you should be replacing it with an all-electric device. We know all-electric households are cheaper to run.
Australia's first publicly funded specialist residential eating disorder treatment centre is ready to open its doors right here in Canberra, and the centre has been welcomed by the families of patients.
For people with an eating disorder, this specialist centre could soon be their home away from home. For David Quilty, whose young adult daughter has an eating disorder, the centre may form part of his caring journey in the future.
One of the terrible things with eating disorders is it isolates sufferers. Involving families and carers makes a huge difference.
The subacute centre will care for those with anorexia, bulimia and binge eating disorder who need more care than can be provided at home, but don't need hospitalisation or intensive support like a feeding tube. It will be staffed by GPs, nurses, dietitians, exercise physio, a social worker and psychologists and psychiatrists as required, and will provide many different types of therapy, including art, yoga and gardening.
We can provide for people of all genders and all body shapes and sizes, and it's a very inclusive space.
It's sort of creating a whole new relationship with food and wellbeing and kind of that more holistic approach to recovery.
At a cost of $13.5 million, the federally funded Residential Eating Disorder Centre has been a long time coming. Funding was first allocated in the federal budget for this centre and several others like it around the country in 2019. A non-hospital-like environment has been promised in the centre that can care for up to 12 patients at any one time, with the first of those expected to arrive for initial appointments from next week. But it won't care for people aged under 16, despite parents of children with eating disorders telling the ABC there is a real need for this in the community.
The kind of care that you provide to someone over 16 versus someone under 16 is quite different.
For now, those patients will need to look elsewhere for support. The centre's first residents will arrive early next month. Lottie Twyford, ABC News, Canberra.
Overseas now, and America's former First Family has taken centre stage as the Democratic Party continues its 4-day-long convention celebrating its new presidential candidate. Barack and Michelle Obama received rapturous applause as they heaped praise upon Kamala Harris and scorn upon Donald Trump.
The president who broke barriers.
I'm feeling fired up.
Arguing for history to be made again.
We have a chance to elect someone who has spent her entire life trying to give people the same chances America gave her.
While he heaped praise on Harris, he was scornful of the man she's up against, Donald Trump.
There's the childish nicknames, this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
The 44th president was introduced by his wife, who's also wildly popular with the Democratic base.
America, hope is making a comeback.
Michelle Obama also skewered the man who replaced her husband as commander-in-chief back in 2017.
His limited, narrow view of the world made him feel threatened by the existence of two hard-working, highly educated, successful people who happen to be black. Who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs?
What was your highlight?
Oh, Michelle Obama, definitely.
Of course, the Obamas in their speech.
Kamala Harris was already the official nominee.
Georgia, how do you cast your vote?
So this year the roll call was only symbolic, but still enthusiastically embraced by delegates.
CNC, turn out for what?
The Democratic Party's pick was beamed in from a rally in the neighbouring swing state of Wisconsin.
They have nominated Coach Walz and me to be the next vice president and president.
Her Republican rival was also on the campaign trail in another Midwest swing state, Michigan.
We're here today to talk about how we are going to stop the Kamala crime wave.
Kamala Harris had a rapid and unusual path to the top of the party ticket. That means this convention doesn't feature the acrimony or resentment often left over from a bruising primary. Perhaps the most important gift the departing Joe Biden gave his anointed successor is a party seemingly extraordinarily united. Democrats drawing inspiration from their past glory.
Yes, she can.
And hoping they can pull off what until recently seemed an unlikely victory. Carrington Clark, ABC News, Chicago.
Coming up later this hour on 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson, the perks being offered to lure people back into the office. But will it work?
I won't sit here and tell you that there's ping pong being played 5 days a week, but it does make for fun on a Friday afternoon.
The state premier is going to recognise the value of the centre of their city, the CBDs that need a boost.
Most productive in the office, 100%.
It's expensive to go to work 5 days a week. It's not just the commute, it's the lunch, it's the outfit you're wearing to work.
Russia says it has shot down nearly a dozen Ukrainian drones headed for Moscow in one of the largest attacks on the Russian capital. Dozens more were shot down over Russian border regions where Ukraine has been targeting critical infrastructure like bridges and oil depots. Meanwhile, Moscow is continuing its military pressure in Ukraine's east and south.
This kiosk ablaze in what is normally a sleepy southern Ukrainian village. Locals say soccer practice had just got started nearby when a Russian shell fell directly onto it. After the explosion, players and spectators scattered.
The children that we injured were here. They didn't speak at all because they were in shock. We took everyone out immediately.
In Ukraine's northeast, residents have been enduring some of their most difficult days. The precarious calm in this region gone since Kyiv's cross-border offensive began.
I've never heard such explosions. I went outside last night, it was burning over there, and the sky was red.
A fortnight on, the Ukrainian military continues its advance on Russian soil, claiming it now controls nearly 100 settlements in Kursk. The operation has boosted Ukrainian soldiers' morale, but it's not clear how much the allies abroad support it. Volodymyr Zelensky revealing he didn't talk to Washington as his government planned the attack.
When it comes to what their longer-term objectives are here, that's something that we're still discussing with them. And I would say, generally speaking, though, Russia has really struggled to respond.
Vladimir Putin may not be close to winning the war against Ukraine, but he has a history of military success. His tough guy image has made him popular with many Russians.
You have an inner need to defend this country and such courage. We're so proud of you.
Chechnya was Putin's first victory. Now the once separatist Chechens are fighting for Moscow in Ukraine. Putin's visit a reminder of past glories, even as his troops today struggle against a much more formidable foe. Catherine Diss, ABC News.
The US Secretary of State has left the Middle East without an agreement between Israel and Hamas. Antony Blinken and mediators from Egypt and Qatar have pinned their hopes on a US bridging proposal aimed at narrowing the gaps between the two sides. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister met right-wing groups of families of fallen soldiers and hostages in Gaza who oppose a ceasefire deal. It came as the IDF released video which purportedly shows the operation to recover the bodies of 6 hostages who were taken in Hamas's October 7 attack. The developments have further upset those Israelis who want Benjamin Netanyahu to reach a deal for a ceasefire and the release of more than 100 remaining hostages. In Gaza City, Palestinian health authorities say at least 10 people were killed in an Israeli strike on a school housing displaced people. The search is continuing for 6 people believed trapped in the hull of a luxury yacht that sank during a storm off the coast of Italy. Deep-sea divers from the Italian Coast Guard are scouring the wreckage near Sicily. It is lying on the seabed at a depth of 50 metres, so for safety reasons, recovery divers can only spend about 12 minutes at the wreck. So far, 1 body has been recovered and one of Britain's best-known tech entrepreneurs, Mike Lynch, is among those missing. It is believed the super yacht was struck by a tornado. Back home, and the Victorian woman charged with murdering 3 relatives after feeding them a meal of beef Wellington made with poisonous mushrooms will face trial next year. The case made global headlines last year after Erin Patterson served the meal to family members who went to her home for lunch. Heather Wilkinson and Don and Gail Patterson died. Local pastor Ian Wilkinson was the only guest to survive. Today in Victoria's Supreme Court, a trial date was set for late April in the regional town of Morwell. Ms Patterson has pleaded not guilty and has previously denied trying to cause any harm to her loved ones. Well, the travel plans of some Canberrans have been upset by a decision by Batik Air to scale back flights between the ACT and Bali. Aviation experts say sustaining international services from the capital is a big challenge.
These Canberra nurses have been dreaming of their Bali escape for a year, but last week their plans hit turbulence.
We got a WhatsApp message just stating that they were moving our flights from the 1st of September to the 25th of August. So initially we thought it was a scam.
But an email confirmed it.
Everyone in our travel party is a nurse, so you just can't change your leave with a week's notice.
They've now rebooked the trip with a different airline at 3 times the cost.
So $970 one way now versus the $300 that we had paid 6 months ago.
Batik Air launched in Canberra in June with great fanfare, promising 3 direct flights to Bali a week. That's now been cut back to 2 services due to lower than expected demand.
When you start a new route, it usually takes between 6 and 9 months to get established. A reality of some of the cost of living challenges that people are experiencing at the moment is that overseas travel and holidays to Bali are probably things that are considered discretionary.
Batik Air is one of just 2 international carriers currently servicing the capital. Aviation experts say Canberra's population size means sustaining those flights can be difficult.
Airlines don't like to fly half-full flights or have empty seats because an empty seat represents no money being made.
Canberra Airport and the ACT government say they're in constant negotiations with airlines to secure more international flights for the capital. They're pushing to resume services to Singapore and New Zealand, which were axed during the pandemic.
The earliest anything new would start would be next year.
Leaving hopeful holidaymakers in a holding pattern. Lily Nothling, ABC News, Canberra.
Meanwhile, Jetstar has joined the ranks of its parent company Qantas in facing a class action over flights that were cancelled during COVID. The claim, launched by the same firm, Echo Law, alleges Jetstar failed to refund money to hundreds of thousands of customers, instead giving them flight credits. Many customers ended up paying the airline more money to then use those credits to rebook their flights. Both class actions are seeking refunds and compensation for customers. To finance now, and both the local share market and the Aussie dollar kept rising today. Here's Alan Kohler.
Jackson Hole kicks off tomorrow. That's the name of the annual symposium of central bankers and economists hosted by the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City, in a valley in Wyoming called Jackson Hole, which is 1,000 miles from Kansas City. But it looks like this, which is a bit nicer than the biggest city in Missouri. All eyes will be on the speech by Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, and he's expected to confirm that US interest rates are about to be cut. So the US dollar has been weakening ahead of Jackson Hole, which is why the Aussie dollar has been rising and went up again today. And gold has been rising as well to a new record high last night, partly because of the weak US dollar, but mainly because of Chinese buying, both by the People's Bank of China avoiding US treasuries and private Chinese investors avoiding the collapsing property market. This is the third great gold bull market since the link between the US dollar and gold was broken by Richard Nixon on August the 15th, 1971, in what is known as the Nixon shock, finally ending the backing of money by gold. And this chart from Bloomberg today is quite interesting. It's the main US share market index, the S&P 500, expressed in gold rather than dollars. And well, it's the same as it was in 1971. The S&P 500 ended its 7-day winning streak last night, but the Aussie market did not. The streak goes on. 9 days now. I don't think there's been one of those since 2016. Today's big profit season winners were finance company Hum Group and tech business WiseTech, whose founder, CEO and largest shareholder Richard White made an extra $1.7 billion today. And that is definitely finance.
Canberra's Nick Kyrgios says it is ridiculous that the world #1 tennis player Jannik Sinner has escaped a suspension after testing positive to a banned substance. Sinner twice tested positive to an anabolic steroid in March, and an independent tribunal accepted his explanation that the substance inadvertently entered his system through massages and sports therapy. The 23-year-old Italian will lose the prize money and rankings points from the Indian Wells tournament, where he recorded one of his positive tests. On social media, Kyrgios posted that Sinner should have been suspended for 2 years and cast doubt on the reason for the positive tests. There you go. Well, to the weather now. And tonight's viewer photo is of a honeybee. It was sent in by Dennis Anderson, who notes that it is that time of the year already. Spring has not properly sprung here in this magnificent part of the nation, but it is certainly flirting with the idea, isn't it? I even got swooped by a magpie today, so do take care if you're out on the mean streets of Canberra. And the reason, of course, that things feel so, well, spring adjacent is because it is a few degrees warmer than average already. Our low was 6 today at the airport, our top 17 at both the airport and Tuggeranong, and you can see it is also still more humid than usual, though the rain that was forecast overnight didn't actually eventuate in Canberra. It was also warm in the Snowy Mountains overnight, 3 degrees the low at Perisher Valley. Cooma hit 16 today, and have a look at the south coast. It was a lot warmer at Moruya, 24 degrees the top there, 23 in Nowra. In the capitals, Brisbane reached 25, Sydney got to 26, and Melbourne just 18. You can see on that map there's a big pool of warm air over northern and central Australia at the moment. More on that in a second. You can see there's a fair bit happening on the satellite because things are quite unsettled still across the entire south of the continent. A high pressure system has taken over, which is actually helping draw some of that warm air we talked about down towards the southeast, but another front is coming our way, and we're going to have a real mix of conditions over the next week. Brisbane tomorrow is headed for about 27 degrees, Sydney a cloudy 22, and Melbourne 18 degrees. There might be some showers about too. In our region, it should be another nice enough day on the south coast. 23 the top in Batemans Bay, 22 is expected at Merimbula. Thredbo Top Station is headed for 2. You can see there might even be a light snow or rain shower in the Alps. Yass is going to reach about 16 degrees. Here in Canberra and Queanbeyan, it is going to be cloudy. There'll be a bit of sun though. There'll also be a bit of rain. It is a real mix. The most likely time for showers is going to be in the late morning, but we aren't expecting a whole lot of rain. After a low of about 5 tomorrow morning, we're going to be headed for around 16 or 17 degrees. Sunrise is just after 6:30 and sunset is just after 20 to 6. And looking ahead, it is going to remain warmer than average for the next week, but don't get too excited just yet because you can see there really is a little of everything on the way. At this stage, 18 degrees is forecast for Friday, 21 for Saturday and Sunday, before things return to more normal conditions on Monday and Tuesday. And that is the latest from the Canberra newsroom for this Wednesday evening. I'm James Glenday. It is always lovely to be with you. Stay with us now for 7:30 with Sarah Ferguson. We'll of course be back at the same time tomorrow night. And until then, Yara, good night.